Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
In the moment, I wasn't really thinking about that, but for like a few days, I was like having like restless nights. And then I had this epiphany of like, wait, like that wasn't like, I didn't want that. And then I was struggling with, well, he got me an Uber there. And that was nice. Like I was trying to like justify it and all of these things. And at the end of the day, it was like, that was just not.
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Shez Leby and Stephanie Boy, and each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics.
Hello, Seven on Sunday listeners. Today we are going to be talking to a girl. Her name is Joy. That's her anonymous name. And Dr. Shez and I are deeply grateful for her bravery in telling this story to us. I think it is eye-opening, and many parents will be surprised to hear about dating culture today.
Definitely. It was really, there were some things that she shared that were surprising to me in relation to sexual choking, aggression, and, these kind of encounters that are through apps that end up being surprisingly almost sexual assaultive. That was something that was really interesting. And again, we've heard this from other people, but most people are looking for honest connection rather than these hookups.
I agree. And it makes me question, if the young people today feel like their hookups are sort of a compromise that they have to make in order to have this real connection that it seems like they all desire. Does that work?
Exactly. I don't know if that actually works. And I'm sure many of you out there will be able to relate to Joy's story. And if you can, you will see that you are definitely not alone.
So let's jump in and talk to Joy. Good morning. Dr. Shez and I are so excited today to talk to Joy, who I met at one of my talks. And Joy, first and foremost, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. Joy, I just wanted to start with, maybe you could give us a little background. I did just tell the audience that you and I met at one of my talks, but you had come up to me afterward because I think you felt there were some truths in there or things that you could relate to. So maybe you can just tell us what it was about that conversation that made you feel like you wanted to come up and talk to me afterward and share your story.
Yeah, for sure. I think that some of the things that you talked about sometimes can come off as taboo and it's just not talked about. And for a while, I kind of felt alone in how I was feeling about my sexual experiences. But once I heard you talk about it and I was able to just kind of like relate that back to my experiences, I was like, wait a second, like this is something bigger. And I knew that I had a story and I knew that you could kind of help me like work through that in a way of just, getting it out there and realizing that I'm not alone in my experiences. And I definitely want to help people make sure that they know that they're not alone in their experiences.
I'm so grateful.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you so much for being willing to share the story. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your story, about what are some of the experiences that you had that you feel like are very relatable, that maybe you didn't realize before were happening across your generation or your culture?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that there's this almost like an undertone of violence in a sense or aggression in how men are having sex right now. And I kind of just thought that that was just how sex worked. And I thought that that was, the norm, and that every time you had sex, it was supposed to be like scary and overwhelming. And you're just like counting the seconds or the minutes until it's over.
Wow.
And then I think that, hearing your talk, it was kind of eye-opening that like this isn't normal and that there is another way to experience like this, connective form of intimacy, because like that's what sex kind of should be, in my opinion, is like an intimate moment, as compared to like scary.
I feel it's important to jump in for a second and just say, I don't think sex should ever be scary. It should never be something that makes either party feel scared for their safety, anything. That doesn't mean that everything is, vanilla or anything like that, but things have to be agreed upon with the participants, and it should never be scary. I mean, that's first and foremost. And I also want to say, I'm sorry that that's your experience, because that should not be your experience. And sadly, too often it is people's experience today.
Thank you.
And what's hard to hear, but so important that you're sharing, is that you thought that that's the way it should be until what, like last week, right? So how old are you again?
19.
19. So I think that something's missing in the education, obviously, and in the kind of understanding of what that's about. And I'm grateful that we can dive into what that exactly is, how it is scary, but also your, kind of introduction to say, like, I want people to know that they're not alone in this. That's so admirable, because I think a lot of people feel alone, obviously. And obviously, people are not talking about it if this has gone on for a while, since you've been sexually active, or since you've kind of had an understanding of what sex is. Having that misconception that it's about being scary and potentially aggressive and all those things, that's a big deal for us to discuss. So this is a great topic. Thank you both for bringing this to the world. It's important.
Joy, do you want to maybe take us back to maybe your first sexual experiences and sort of walk us through the things that kind of stand out in your mind about, was what you experienced common amongst your friends? I know, like, obviously I brought this up in a classroom, so obviously it has some relevance to college students. Otherwise, I would not bring this up, to a classroom. But I know it resonated with a lot of people from my feedback that I got. But maybe you can just sort of walk us through the experiences that you had when you started having sex. Was it initially like, so my conversation obviously is circled largely around a sexual culture that's informed by pornography. So maybe you can tell me, like, with that knowledge, maybe that sort of struck a nerve with you and went like, oh yeah, this did seem kind of porn. I didn't realize it wasn't supposed to be like porn. Are you able to walk us through some of your early experiences through today?
Yeah. So it was the summer going into junior or senior year. I think it was senior year, yeah, that I lost my virginity. And it was, I always wanted to wait till it was like someone I trusted or something like that. But in the moment, I kind of just, I don't know if it was like pressured, or I kind of just want to like get it over with. Like, all right, like, let's just, see what it's like. I had this guy over that I had a class with, and I kind of just thought we were hanging out because we had hung out before. And then, we started kissing, and then he pulled out a condom and was like, do you want to have sex? And I was like, well, it's my first time. And he was like, that's fine. It'll it'll be good. And I was like, oh, okay. And obviously it was painful. I feel like everyone's first time is, but it was just kind of like, I closed my eyes, and then it's kind of like I just I don't know if like disassociated is the right word, but like went outside of my body for a minute, and then like it was done, and then he was like, do you want to go get a smoothie? And I was like, okay. And then he dropped me off, and I was just like at home alone, and I was like, is that it? Like, I was like, I don't feel good. I don't feel anything. And I was like, this can't be it. Like, it's just probably because it's him, and like he's not the most charming guy or like anything like that. And so I kind of found myself like, I tried again with someone else because I was like, there's no way that this is like all that it is. And so the times after in high school, I would say like weren't traumatizing or weren't anything crazy. It was just kind of like high school boys. It was more like they don't know what they're doing, and I don't really know how to, I don't know what I should be expecting. And so that was kind of the dynamic. But once I got to college, I think like the sex like really changed, and it was like very abrupt and very like, whoa, this is
I'm
different.
sorry, Joy, can you repeat that? Was it abrupt, did you say, or was it rough?
Abrupt, the change.
It was abruptly went from high school experiences to being rough.
Yeah.
So, if I can go back to before you had sex with the boy in high school, would you say that your initial, like, because parents may be listening to this as well as young people, I think there was sort of like a buildup when we were younger that would start very innocently at kissing and things like that. And it took, I think, a long time for things to build up to a place where you would have sex. And I don't think that there were a lot of like, none of us were really informed. Pornography does inform the way sex happens today. And so I think a lot of the stuff where we were kind of fumbling around and trying to figure stuff out doesn't happen today. Like, what was fooling around like prior to having sex? Was that like innocent and sweet, or were there like aggressive expectations even for, let's just say, oral sex or whatever happens before you actually have penetrative sex?
Um, I experienced a lot of friends with benefits in high school, which if I can like persuade anyone to never do that, like don't, just don't. It's so messy and it's so confusing, especially when you're like 15 or 16, like being told that, oh, we can hook up, but I don't want to date you. Like that, it kind of hurts. And so when I would, be in those situations, it was just like we would hang out, and it was almost like a prequel to us hanging out was like me, giving them head, and then we could watch the movie. Or it was like I would try and like cuddle, and it would just kind of be like a little standoffish, like, no, like don't do that, or things like that. So I think it was from the get-go, I felt like a lot was expected from me from the first time I gave head. I just felt like I had to be perfect. And I felt that like everyone was gonna know because of course like he told people like how I did and like things like that, which like doesn't feel amazing. So
No, I want to ask you, when you said, and because this is so important, when you said, a guy says, I want to fool around, but I don't want to date you. And you said that kind of hurts. As a mental health therapist, I'm like, yeah, that hurts. And it makes sense to me why you would dissociate when sex happened that kind of followed that pattern. So I'd love to hear more about the kind of hurts. Like how did you handle that as a young person? And what were all those feelings going into it?
yeah, for sure. I kind of like going through like my feelings now through all of that because I've never really ever had an actual boyfriend or relationship, and it does hurt because I've had, people interested in me, but when we just have sex, it feels like, oh, you're only interested in my body. And so I kind of described it as I feel like the waiting room for guys to find their next girlfriend. So it's like I'm the one that they can have sex with and fool around with and, get that out of and pretend that we're dating, but not actually have any of that, label
That
or any.
emotional connection.
Yeah. And then it always just feels like, oh, a month later they have a girlfriend. And it's like, why wasn't it does kind of feel like a little bit like, why wasn't I enough? Like we had a good time. Like, so it does hurt. It makes me very insecure and very, just I try not to make it up. I try not to like put that onto myself as like, oh, it's not like they didn't go out seeking a girlfriend because I wasn't enough. Like I try not to let myself think that way, but it's hard not.
That's very hard. The analogy of a waiting room, that's so powerful, Joy, like so powerful. And you are so much more than a waiting room. But that's powerful. And I can imagine it would feel that way because especially if your thinking is if I perform and do this the right way, which, Steph can talk about performative kind of mindset. If I do this, then I'll get what I need, which is the emotional connection. And then when that doesn't happen, it feels like, whoa, what did I do? Or why am I not enough? So that's big. So how did you get through that? What support systems did you have in place? You're now much older, or 3 years older, whatever. But how did you kind of navigate that?
Well, it definitely happened in high school, but it's also like, especially freshman year of college, I was really experiencing that as well. And even like in September, I had an experience with that. And so it's not like I have this pattern where I like will meet someone and then instead of, slowly building like a emotional bond, I kind of just let them, they see a pretty girl and they're like, okay, let's have sex. And so I've tried to, my therapist and I have worked through like what boundaries can I set when I meet someone so that, we don't just jump into the sexual acts because I don't know, for so long I thought like that was what you do when you meet someone that you're attracted to. You just have sex and then they date you and it's perfect, but that's just not realistic. So kind of like shifting my mindset of how things evolve.
Can I jump in here for a second? I just want to say, Joy, first and foremost, this is so honest, and your honesty is what will connect you and this story to so many people, because some of the details might be different. But what I know is that when I do a survey of students and it's on paper and I say, are you okay with one night stands and hookups and all that kind of stuff? Almost every female that responds says they're okay with it, because I think that's what society is telling you, that you have to be okay with it. But then when we get together in smaller groups and we kind of dig in, nobody's actually okay with it. I mean, in all honesty, I don't think I've met one female who's okay with it. And so largely my small groups are female. So I don't know. I know a lot of young men who are not okay with that. It may be the kind of young men that I know, but I feel like there's this cultural expectation that friends with benefits or one night stands or hookup culture is supposed to make you feel okay. But we are, as human beings, we are social creatures, we are bonding creatures. And when we have sex, and I think you sort of touched on this a little bit, you talked about you wanted to create that emotional bond. And it was something that I talk about a little bit about, like the intimacy pyramid, that sex used to be the top of the intimacy pyramid. And now it's like, it's where people start. And then they're trying to build the other intimacies out. And it's kind of like an upside down pyramid, if you will, trying to build experiential intimacy and intellectual intimacy and emotional intimacy. And it's harder once you've had sex because it first of all, it's really hard to build up to that if the pyramid is the right way, right? It's like hard, like you kind of check people off, like, oh, that person doesn't meet that, so they don't ever make it to sex. But now you have it the other way around. So it's a little bit harder to go the other way. But I think what you're saying is really at the heart of what most people think. They're supposed to like one night stands. They're supposed to be okay with friends with benefits. They're supposed to be okay with all of these things. But in their heart, what they really want is a connection. Sex, releases all sorts of neurochemicals like oxytocin, and that's a bonding chemical, neurochemical. So you're not wrong. And I think that the more we normalize the conversation that hookups don't feel okay and friends with benefits makes really confusing and messy feelings, I think you are doing a great service for your generation to say that out loud and to acknowledge it.
Definitely. I think that it was almost like when I was younger, I feel like I was kind of raised in that time where it was like, it's empowering for women to, just go have sex, like take that back, because it used to be like abstinence only. And then, that was the sex education I received, was abstinence only. And then on the flip side, I was hearing on social media, like empowerment, like show that boy who's boss, things like that. And I think that kind of warped my view of what sex should look like. And also it's like I would see on TV, like these high schoolers having this like crazy sex, and like they were so happy when they did it. And so I personally like never really got into porn. It just like really made me uncomfortable because I knew I had like researched the industry, and so I kind of understood like how it wasn't always like consensual and how like sex workers weren't always compensated. And so I think that, I just saw this idealized like for TV sex in like Gossip Girl or like shows like that.
I think it's really confusing, right? Like, especially if, and this is a really important point, if your parents aren't having conversations with you, and I think maybe your parents did have some conversations with you, but if your parents aren't having conversations with you, you're getting your messages from your culture, from Gossip Girl. Gossip Girl has so many bad messages in there, but I mean, you're right. And that is actually a big problem. First of all, so kids who are listening to this can have a realistic approach to what they're looking at. And this is part of media literacy, right? You usually have about 22 to 26-year-olds playing high school students in those shows. Sex Education, Gossip Girl, great examples. You have much older people. So first of all, their bodies are completely and utterly unrealistic for what it means to be a high schooler. They're being coached through what this intimacy is supposed to look like. And it's completely and utterly different than high school, which is awkward and fumbling and all of these kind of things, And if somebody's been informed by porn, you think it's supposed to look like this porn show, Not to go into so much detail, but I did have someone tell me the other day that somebody was trying to have sex with them on an angle because that's what they saw in porn. And they were like, yeah, the angle is so that they have a good camera view of what's happening. My body doesn't go like this. My body goes like this, So these unrealistic ideas that are just actually painful are what is being perpetuated. So I think that you saying Gossip Girl, things like that, like it's really important that we have an awareness, and that's a great thing for school, is to have a media literacy so we know what we're watching and how unrealistic it is, whether it's mainstream or pornography, quite frankly.
And when you bring up confusing, like I cannot imagine how confusing that is. So for me as a therapist, the fact that you would dissociate to get it over with, to kind of get to the goal, which is real connection, which still didn't happen if the person is like, let's go have a smoothie, and then see ya. But the confusion, I feel like that's definitely contributing to all the mental health issues that we see right now, because there's no place to kind of figure that out and explore necessarily, and explore these things like you're talking about, Steph. Like, where do people talk about these things? They probably don't. So it just continues. So it's a big gift that you're giving by sharing here what your experience is. So yes, definitely. Thank you so much for your honesty with that.
Well, and I think just before, Joy, we jump back into your story, I just want to say that is my point of why parents need to be talking to their kids. You need to see things, and without judgment, talk to your kids. What does that make you feel like? Or use your own experience. This doesn't make people happy. Like, ultimately, thank you, Joy, for giving voice to, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that your sentiment about these friends with benefits or hookups and all that kind of stuff, does that, the guys who are not invested emotionally in these experiences, do you feel as though most girls feel this sense of being let down or disappointment or sadness that they didn't get the emotional connection, they just got the physical connection?
Oh, definitely. There's like even a term now, instead of friends with benefits, it's called like a situationship. And it's like, it feels like this generation of guys, especially like right now in college, like they just have this idea that like they don't want to date. They just want to, have sex and get drunk and do their frat boy thing. And it's sometimes like, it's really sad and it's really confusing. And I don't know, it's like when I ask, can you maybe like take me on a date? It's like, no, like I'm not interested in dating. Like I don't do that. Like I'm just,
Girl, you are so much better than asking someone for a date. You are gorgeous. You are smart. You're an amazing catch for anyone. You should never have to ask anyone to take you on a date. If someone doesn't see that, they're an idiot. They're an idiot. But I think it starts.
No more waiting room. No more waiting room.
Or not a waiting room. And let me just tell you something. It starts with you having the power to say what you're saying right now, with you empowering other girls to say, you know what, this isn't what it's supposed to feel like. This isn't what I want. And hold on, I'm just going to jump in one more thing. My whole issue with, and obviously this really got into my crawl because I've brought it up several times, but the whole song WAP, I think, is what is really wrong here. What I heard in WAP was, sorry, that was Cardi B, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I heard in WAP, I heard Cardi B saying all kinds of things that she was like excited to do with a guy that were a complete porn script. It was an absolute porn script. And when I had an issue with it, because I was like, oh, there's a lot of girls who don't want to be choked like that. Like her specific lyrics about being choked and, parking shit in her garage or whatever, like whatever her terminology was. But all of it, and I don't remember now, was like literally all from a porn script. And people were like, she's just sexually empowered. And this is what I say. She won and I am not a big like patriarchy, down with the patriarchy, but she won the patriarchal game of one-upping guys in sex, right? But if we're to be true to our femininity, to our womanhood, to feminists around the world, we need to create a sexual paradigm that looks like something that is fulfilling to women. You don't win by playing a man's game of what sex is supposed to look like. You win by redefining what sex looks like for girls that is fulfilling and meets all of your needs, emotional, physical, all of the needs. And you win when you get that, not when you perform what a man thinks you should be and you are okay with it, because all you're doing is denying the truth of your femininity. That's what that song represented to me. And that's what friends with benefits and these hookups where girls go, oh yeah, I'm fine with it. And then they go home and they go, I'm not fine with it.
I have to say too, I have to say, no, yay. Thank you, Steph, because that is so powerful and important. And I want to say, too, that the males that I see are in the same boat. I don't think it's just females. Across the board, our, population of young people are depressed and anxious. And so they, too, are craving real connection. But the media forms coming in kind of, tailor them to think this is the way I'm going to get that. And then they don't either. I think it goes both ways. So, yeah, I think it's important to look across the board.
But they've been getting that message for longer. The males have been getting the message that they need to be sexually promiscuous, and that makes them the man. You know what I mean? Like they've been getting that message. And when they're not that, then they are very derogatory gay people terms, And so who's going to be like that? Like I've had young men from my classes come up and say, I didn't want to hook up with a girl. And then all my friends were like, what is wrong with you? You're a blank, derogatory gay term. And it's like, okay, so we've been telling men that story for longer than we've been saying it to women. Women have just been like, oh, I want guys. I'll play their game to get them to fulfill myself. Anyway, Joy, I want to go back to your story because it's really important. And I want to just ask you really quickly before we jump into like college experience. I'm so glad that we went back to the pre-sex experiences because that's really informative. These are your first sexual experiences, even though they may not have been penetrative sex. They are equally important. And sex, like as defined by who, like it's weird. If you're a lesbian, you don't have sex that way. So these are intimate moments that are every bit as important as penetrative sex. Okay. So thank you for sharing those earlier experience with them. But you said these guys would come over and be like, you would give them head. And was this reciprocal at all? Or was this just like, did you derive any pleasure from these experiences? Or was this really just about them?
It would sometimes they would, do things to me, but it honestly at first made me uncomfortable because I was just really insecure. During high school, I went into recovery for an eating disorder, so I was very, very insecure about my body. And like I just assumed that like if they like touched like a curve that I had, they were like, not going to be able to like perform sexually because they were like ew or something like that. So, and that's my own like, eating disorder brain at work there. So for a while, it didn't really let me enjoy experiences. There was like a few times I would say where I don't know if it was like life-changing or amazing, but I was like, okay, this is fine. Yeah.
That's so tough. Thank you for sharing that too, because that's what young people today, it's never one thing from my experience. It's always these layers of things that you guys are navigating. Again, I'm using that word, but that these things that you guys are going through, it's a lot. So thank you for sharing that too, because the insecurity with females and their bodies, especially when you throw in an eating disorder, is another big part of the picture of why sexual experiences are not reciprocal. That it is, again, let me please him, and then I'll have the emotional connection that is what I really need.
And when our bodies are being depicted to be Blake Lively, who's 24, pretending she's 16. I mean, come on. We have the most unrealistic examples of what we're supposed to look like.
Right.
Anyway, I digress.
I'd like to ask a question. When you said at the very beginning that there's an undertone of violence and aggression in your sexual experiences these days, can you tell us more about what that is like?
Yeah. So this is more speaking to kind of like the college experiences that I've had, but it does feel like I think that when Stephanie was talking about consent when she came into my class, it did strike a nerve because I had always kind of felt like, like, was that fully consensual? But it feels like there's this idea right now that like kissing is consent, or me inviting you over is consent for sex. And I'll tell a story of like something that I experienced. There was one night I was, scrolling on Tinder because I was feeling like really down about myself. And this guy was, telling me how beautiful he was. He was in town visiting. So we had a hotel room and he was like, come over, like we could get room service, things like that. And I was having a really bad week. So I was like, you know what? Like, I'll do it, like putting myself in really dangerous situations. And so he sent me an Uber there. And the second I got there, I was so uncomfortable and I wanted to leave. And there was no like room service and there was no movie that he promised we would watch. It was just like I sat on the bed. He kissed me for like 20 seconds and then he put a condom on and like started, having sex. And I stopped for a second. I was like, wait, like, do I get anything? I was like, I'm not like ready to, like, there was no like foreplay or anything. And so then he like, all he did was like kind of like jab his fingers like at me. And then I was like, okay. And then he just like went back to having sex and finished and then got me an Uber home. And I was like, that really like kept me up for a few nights because I was like, it was just so like the only words I have to describe is like the words come up. It's like jab or like intense or like it just feels like it sometimes feels like I'm like a sex doll or I'm like not a person when I get there. And, I like really struggled. I was like, is me, Ubering there, like, is that the consent? Because like he knows that there's that expectation. So
She's ready to go. Go, Steph, go.
no, first I want to say something about that story makes me really sad for you because I can tell for you that that was not what you wanted and absolutely not what you deserve. So I want to start with that. And it doesn't matter if you said in a bar to someone, I can't wait to go home and fuck you. Pardon my language. If someone were to say that, that does not mean that anything is expected of you 20 minutes later when you arrive at their house. You can decide at any moment, at any point, whether penetration has begun or it hasn't begun. You can stop at any time. You owe nothing to anybody. Things can change in a minute, okay? You got there under the false pretense that this person, let's set aside the fact that this was dangerous, which I think you acknowledge yourself. This is very, very dangerous. But everything that he pretended was going to happen, the room service, the movie, maybe sort of alluded that there was some sort of connection between the two of you, like watching a movie. I don't know whether he promised a porn, but I'm assuming it was like, we can watch a movie because of, you said that you don't even like porn. So that wouldn't have been a drawing factor for you. But this is your brain thinking it's a connection. And then you get there and you're like, whoa, these dynamics are completely different. This is somebody who just wants to have sex with me. This is a bait and switch. First of all,
this is assault. This is assault. Yeah. This is sexual assault or rape, really.
If you did not consent to what was happening, this is definitely sexual assault. But it is certainly, we talked about in class the difference between the very bare minimum of, affirmative consent. That is the bare minimum. That it should never be, and just put your little tiny pinky toe over the legal definition of what is consent is like, that should never be the kind of sex that you aspire to. Aspirational sex is enthusiastic, and in my opinion, the best is ethical, where it is, you are completely, you've shared what your expectations are. You know what I mean? Like, this person was certainly not acting ethically because it sounds as though he made it sound like you you might have fooled around or whatever, you might have been down with that, but it was more about like the connection and watching the movie and having something to eat, and you got there and he's pulling out a condom. That's not at all what he presented to you on the phone or on text.
And I just want to say this, if I hear the words jab coupled with your emotional experience afterwards, that's definitely sexual assault. That was non-consensual. And he continued to jab, which is, even if it wasn't jabbing, it still was, the emotional aftermath tells me what the experience really was. And so it makes sense that you would have trouble with it for really more than a couple days, because of what that does to your psyche, what that does to your body, your emotional body, your physical body. Jab is the opposite of joy. That's for sure. That is not joy.
Joy, did you feel as though you consented to that sexual experience? Was that your feeling when you walked away?
In the moment, I wasn't really thinking about that, but for like a few days, I was like having like restless nights, and then I had this epiphany of like, wait, like that wasn't like, I didn't want that. And then I was struggling with, well, he got me an Uber there, and that was nice. Like I was trying to like justify it and all of these things. And at the end of the day, it was like, that was just not.
Did he ask you? Did he say, do you want to have sex?
No.
Yeah. And there's nothing should be taken for granted. Nothing should be taken for granted. This person didn't even know you. This person did not know you.
It's an interesting commentary that this is what women of all ages do. We've rationalized. We're like, oh, but he got me dinner, or he got me an Uber there. Like, yeah, $10, $20 Uber. Wow. Like that, we do that. And that's so interesting to think of. Why do we let that be okay? That the rationalization of, but he did get me an Uber, that was enough. No, that wasn't at all.
Joy, I know that your experience is not yours alone. I mean, I've had girls tell me about how, someone bought them drinks, and so they felt obligated to have sex with them. And I said, you know what? If your parents understood that you were so desperate for money to buy drinks at school, I'm pretty sure they'd give you an extra $100 a month, $50 a month, so you could buy your own drinks and not feel as though you owed anyone anything, because no one owes anyone. I mean, I'm not saying in my generation it was any different. I don't think that that's the case. I do think that this has always been going on. Oh, well, he was nice. Oh, like Dr. Shez said, like just second guessing ourselves, like, but I said, or but did I allude to that? No, that's why we have changed the definition of consent. It's no longer no means no. It's yes means yes. And why do we say yes means yes? Because you could be passed out. You could be feeling intimidated. You could be any number of things and not say no. But to get a yes is something entirely different, right? And I want to go beyond that, something we talked about in class, and I think you can tell me how you felt about this, but a yes doesn't just come from somebody's mouth. If you notice that your partner is pulling away, or is nervous all of a sudden, or anxious, or their body stiffens up, or they start to turn away from or divert attention and doing something, or they get up, these are all body language cues. And that's why affirmative consent is the low bar, because there could be somebody who feels intimidated into saying yes, right? But their body is going to show what maybe their mouth, like maybe they felt as though they had to say it because they were in a situation. But if you're somebody who wants to respect and honor and dignify the person that you are having sex with, you are going to take notice of their words, of their anxiety level, of their body stiffening. All of these things are outward, obvious clues to somebody who cares about the person they're having sex with, right? That's why we go for the next level, which is enthusiastic. Hell yes, I want to do this. Let's do it right now. That is another level. Affirmative consent is just literally putting your little pinky toe over the legal definition. It's not what anyone should aspire to.
The hell yes, nothing feels jabbing when it's a hell yes. You know, jabbing is a hell no, I'm scared. So somebody jabs. I wonder if that person realizes that he could be charged with sexual assault. Like, I'm sure he doesn't. I'm sure this isn't the first time that he has done that. Gotten on Tinder, has a hotel room, you know, all that.
He lied about what he was, bait and switch.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you this, Joy, do you find with peers in college, so that experience, I totally understand, you know, the progression and the aggression with your experiences there. Do you find with peers in college that the level of aggression and kind of violence is something that you've noticed different from high school to college?
Yes, definitely. I kind of, you know, with the choking thing, like that is for me, I've just come to like expect it every experience I have.
Every 100%. Do you think they're choking?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
And I find myself like sometimes if I want the experience, if I want the actual sex to be over, like I'll have them like choke me more so that maybe they'll like, you know, it'll speed up the process and then they can finish and then I can be done. And, you know, that may just be like a me thing of like, you know, I don't think everyone wants the sexual experience to be over so that they can like get to the aftercare, but that is something that I noticed that I do. And then like even the positioning that you were talking about, like I've had guys like immediately put my legs up in the air. And like that's something that I find that you do like later in the actual sex because it's, you know, kind of jarring. Like the first few, you know, inserts, I mean, just, you know, is in my opinion like should be gentle because it's still like, you know, and so it's kind of like whoa.
Yeah, you have to make sure your partner is enjoying themselves and it's not abrupt and aggressive.
Yeah.
It's
And painful if you're not there. You're 100% right.
Painful. And so yeah, I feel like I've been moved in every which way for them to like get off more.
This is a big topic for me that I'm so glad you bring up, that you're willing to compromise and be okay with the way your sexual experiences are because you really just want to get it over with to get to the emotional connection or physical connection at the end, the cuddling and the aftercare, you called it. What a great word. And my question is, do guys offer you the aftercare? Do you find that? So you're willing to even be choked, you know, kind of definitely risk your life for the aftercare. Are men, I'll call them men, not boys, but are men or boys giving you the aftercare?
No.
No. So even that, so even though it's so risky and you're doing it to get to this point, you're still not getting what you need from these individuals.
Yeah. Definitely.
So that's the state of the world that's the state of young people dating right now. That's the state of why loneliness is an epidemic in our country, because you know you're hoping for this and you're willing to even do these things that are dangerous in order to get what you really, really need, and you're still not getting it. So that's so heartfully sad to me. And it's not just you, it's married people too. I work with married people who are in the same situation that have been married for even a long time and they don't feel the connection and the aftercare, you know. So we really need to be taught, if this is an epidemic of loneliness, we really need to be taught what is the antidote to loneliness. How are we helping ourselves to not feel that? And how are we helping each other? Because otherwise we're just going out and trying all these things and it's devastatingly dangerous, and you do have to dissociate. That's why that dissociation makes sense to me. That's a coping skill to get over with it quickly. Let me just dissociate. Let me do whatever he wants to do, and then I'll maybe get what I want, but you're still not.
I want to say also that you're doing whatever it takes for him to get off, and getting off is so much more challenging because of porn. And my kids would be like, Mom, you're always going back to porn. But it is true, because you're putting your life literally on the line. Okay, choke me harder if that's going to make you get off, or do this more aggressively if that's what it takes to get you off. And you're not alone in this. I don't want you to think for any minute that you are alone in this, because you are one of many young women that I've talked to that are like, they don't even oftentimes have an orgasm. But because society, again, the messaging that we've gotten is that sex is over when a guy comes.
Right.
We don't even say sex is over when both people have experienced pleasure. You know, it's not even about pleasure, honestly. You're going through painful experiences so this person can get off. And I think that we need to think about those things. And like, again, even almost going back to my explanation of the Cardi B WAP thing, it's like we are defining these experiences by what, you know, is male prioritization. And it's not mutual pleasure. It's not mutual prioritization. It's not care and dignity and respect for the other person. So it makes me sad to think of how many girls are putting their own safety and pleasure behind guys who are, you know, I'm not even saying men, this isn't even about men being horrible people, but they've gotten their messaging from porn that it's all about this like final, like every porn ends when a guy orgasms so that the camera can see. And that is like literally drilled in messaging that's what it is. And jackhammer penetration, like you were saying when your legs are up and it hurts. I'm going to just say this. I hope that young men are listening to this. I really do. Because more than 80% of women can only have sex from clitoral stimulation. It is less than 20% that can derive, like get an orgasm from penetration alone. And what sexologists have said is that it's also the rhythm and the kind of movement of the bodies. But jackhammer penetration is not what that sex was defined as. Jackhammer penetration is like a pounding on a clitoris. That is not the type that's going to lead to orgasm. So young men have been so ill-informed about what it is that brings women to pleasure, because in porn, you know, they're acting as though they've had an orgasm. And so, you know, it really puts women in this very dangerous, precarious situation when they are having sex, especially when it's not with a partner who's caring enough to prioritize you or make sure that this is a mutually pleasurable and desired experience.
I want to say this too. The porn informed sexual education leaves out completely emotional connection. There is maybe a tiny bit of foreplay and flirting or whatever, but there
Not
is
anymore.
nothing.
Not
There's
anymore.
nothing. And so something that's, you know, orgasms start up here. They start in your brain, you know, they start in your heart and soul connection of being able to be like, you know, I like this person. I love this. I love this person. And when that's missing, you know, the physical act, no matter what, really isn't necessarily going to happen. And so what they don't show, just what you said, Steph, in porn is afterwards, the goal is ejaculation for a male. And then afterwards, there's nothing. And so again, that messaging of where would a woman possibly be, you know, emotionally satisfied, or a man, it's giving that message to everyone that emotional connection, because really where sex ends is what you're saying, Joy. You're saying that after sex, that cuddling and that aftercare, that's where the loving relationship is kind of culminated really emotionally, that's where it's culminated. But instead, we have this education that it culminates at male ejaculation. But that's what it's so interesting that naturally you're expressing joy, that you crave this emotional connection. And yet in everything you see in the media or in porn or out there, that's missing. But yet, are we surprised that it's a national epidemic that we're lonely? No, of course not.
Yeah.
Joy, when we originally spoke, you sort of talked about, yes, you had this experience, but you said with most guys that come to your apartment or whatever, their definition of sex is literally push you down on the bed and then it starts. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just want to be clear because I know it sounds like it's this one guy, but you've seen this. Have you heard of this from your friends too? Like, do you think that this is kind of common?
Yeah, I do. I think I know it's more prevalent for me because a lot of my friends are in relationships. So like their experience is different, but I definitely think that it's just this consensus of what I've heard, at least from, the girls I know that do have hookups and one night stands and things like that.
Well, again, I am so grateful that you're willing to have this conversation with us and share this story with us. Was there anything else that you wanted to share? I want to say to our audience that we have talked to Joy before, and Joy, I think you know yourself that unlike a lot of girls who don't realize that, maybe their needs aren't being met or that there's some sort of unhealthy way that they are engaging in these sort of relationships, I think your goal is you're working on it. You're trying to figure you out, which is an amazing gift to yourself. But you've figured out that this doesn't work for you. So when we say these stories, we're not saying them like Dr. Shez is not just walking away from big situations that you're telling us about, Joy, that we would normally dig in more, but you do have your own mental health, or you do have your own psychologist or therapist that you're working with.
Yeah, I am.
I was really, really happy to hear that you're working with a therapist who's working with boundaries and kind of you looking inward and looking at yourself and how this socialization process has really, impacted your behavior and your mental health. And then now how you're really tailoring that to what do I need? What do I want? I was looking up this morning the definition of connection, because when you say you want to get to the aftercare, I know that's about connection. And Brene Brown has the best definition of connection. And I think that's what you're working on for yourself, so that then in relationships, you can carry that over to this is what I need. And this is not out of question. Like there are a lot of people that recognize that they want this. It's not to say that all males, are these jabbing, jarring, porn influenced people. But Brene Brown's definition of connection is, I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship.
I love that.
So the encounters that you've had, I'm going to call them encounters because they are not connection. They are encounters. And realizing that a connection, a true connection, it doesn't even have to be a relationship, but a true connection, you're seen, heard, valued, and without judgment, you give and receive, and you derive sustenance and strength from that. So that's important to keep that kind of in all our minds, and for the audience to know that that's the goal here. That really is a human need. It's not just a female need. It's a human need. And if we're going to do anything about this epidemic of loneliness, we have to come at it from that perspective. And porn, sex, choking, all these other things are not giving us the real connection. They're giving us encounters that might momentarily induce some brain chemicals that help us feel good in the moment or help somebody feel good in the moment, but not the long-standing connection. But I'm so happy that you're working with a therapist. I think you're an amazing human and amazing young woman. And we definitely want to have you back because you have great insight and great strength. I'm so honored and just blown away by your strength. So thank you.
Thank you.
Joy, can I ask you one quick question? How did it feel to hear how Dr. Shez just defined connection? How'd that make you feel?
It definitely resonated with me of like what I'm searching for. And I really like rephrasing what I've experienced as like encounters and not connection.
Isn't it interesting? I think it's really important. Language is so amazing. Sometimes we just need someone to define or give language or give context to experiences that we have so that our brain can shift. Shez, I'm so glad you did that because that to me even helps me to think more when I'm talking to young people about what it is that you're looking at, especially that word valued.
Right.
I think that, Joy, I think that's what you were looking for. You were looking for someone to value who you are.
Yes, definitely.
So I love that you now have those words. You have those words, you have those definitions. I'm going to put those in the show notes because I think that definition is so beautiful. And I love that you said encounters. I agree with you, Joy. For your brain, it's so much healthier to really categorize those things as they actually are, because you deserve connection. Encounters,
yes,
are something of the past. Today we move on. We move on. You are not a waiting room. You are going to have connections, and we are leaving behind encounters.
Amen. I want to say too that this is really important, Joy, for you to hear. The encounters that you encountered were not your fault. You went into it with the mindset of, hey, this will bring me connection. I'm okay with this. I'm okay with compromising because it's going to get me connection. And now you know differently. And when we know better, we do better. We all know that. And not even that you have to do better, but just go into it with eyes wide open that I'm not going to do any more encounters. I'm not going to sit in the waiting room for encounters. I'm going to seek genuine connection. And if somebody is not there, able, willing, or interested in connection, then I'm moving on. Like I'm not even going to give that the time of day. So that's important that you hear too, that none of this is your doing or your fault. You went in with great intention. And unfortunately, you had some situations, or many, that hurt you, that physically and emotionally hurt you. So
and they were just simply not worthy of you. They were not worthy of you. You deserve better. And I say this because I love this expression in Spanish when they say it no longer serves me. Those encounters, you have grown and you now understand those encounters no longer serve you. They don't serve your higher good. And your goal.
What's the Spanish for it?
Because they say no me sirve. It doesn't serve me any longer. No me sirve. So like, and I hope I got the Spanish right, but I think I did. But it no longer serves the person you are.
Yeah. I want to say one last thing. I, was a fan of the MeToo movement because it helps people feel that they're not alone. Like, yep, me too. And Me Too has to evolve into NoMore. It's not hashtag Me Too. Yep. Has to evolve into NoMore. And that's where true empowerment comes from of I am out of the waiting room. I am hashtag NoMore. That's not happening. Not just, yep, me too. So I love that at this age, Joy, and you're young at this age, you're already moving to hashtag NoMore. Yay, you. So impressed and proud of you.
Joy, thank you for joining us today. We really, really, like I said, appreciate your insight. Is there anything else that you want to say, Joy, before we end?
I think just the overall sentiment that, we're worth more than jabbing and scary experiences, and that sex can be something that is amazing and connective, and it doesn't have to be scary. And I appreciate everything that y'all have said about that.
We appreciate you.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy. We'll talk again.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll have you back.
Take care.
Thanks.
Okay, wow. I think we can all take a deep breath with everything that Joy shared. Man, was that important to hear and hard to hear, but so important to hear the hard reality of what's happening. And what I'm feeling the call to action for is I want us to investigate and see if males in today's culture are in fact craving what I think they are, craving real connection and relationships versus just the encounter, quote unquote, and how the encounters leave them feeling versus what we heard from Joy. And have they had experiences with real connection? And I'm excited to have Joy back to ask her as she progresses in her healing if she is actually experiencing connection with herself, first of all, getting that seen, heard, and valued from within, but then how that's translating to friends and maybe relationships over time. But I'm excited, Steph, for us to invite some of the males that we both know or that you work with and have talked to hear their perspective. And that was a great conversation, really important for all of us. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it was. It was. I'm so grateful to Joy. If moms are listening and dads are listening, it's really important that we share with our kids that is what any type of relationship, sexual, intimate, friendship, whatever, has to have all of those connective things. I say to my students, when we were young, no one sent a dick pic, which is so common, sadly, today. That's how someone's interested in what? An encounter. So just even starting with that very simple first, foundational connection that you have with another person, you're already starting down the path of this is not about me valuing you. This is about the sexual encounter. Even just telling them how was it when you were young and you connected with somebody that you cared about. Kids need to hear that because they don't hear it enough. We as parents assume that kids are going to connect in the same way we did, but they're not at all. And the experiences are not at all similar to something that you would even recognize. I know a lot of older people who are dating now people who are younger, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. The expectations, the things that they think. So I think, to just really give young people perspective and to be someone safe that they can talk to about what's happening in their life, it cannot be underestimated how important that is. You will be the only voice they have that's really looking out for them, for their best interest.
Yeah. And if parents can't do it, 7 on Sundays, we are opening up those conversations so that kids have a place to share and hear that they're not alone, number one, but to share, no, this is what I really value and what I really want. And I don't think that there are enough of those kind of forums. So I'm excited to keep doing that. We got to keep going.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Dr. Shez.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Shez Levy and Stephanie Boy based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7 on Sundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.